Stories from the coronavirus trenches, Kaseya adds no-wait cyber insurance, letting password expirations expire, and more with guest host Mike Semel, plus a special interview with IT Harvest Richard Stiennon. It's ChannelPro Weekly, episode 138, Needle Nose Ned. Today's episode is sponsored by Corporate Armor. Get free remote support software exclusively from Corporate Armor. Stop spending big money on expensive remote desktop tools and use Corporate Armor Connect and Fix for free. Connect and Fix is secure, reliable remote desktop software that enables you to support clients and fix their technology issues remotely, from anywhere, anytime. Connect and Fix runs in a fast, secure cloud, offering commercial-grade and compliance-friendly remote desktop and support technology for free. It includes features like file transfer, session recording, restart and reboot, and live video and text chat on PC, Mac, and Linux platforms. Users can even share their screens with clients for presentations or training purposes. So stop paying for remote access and support software and switch to Connect and Fix by Corporate Armor. They take the pain out of sourcing IT products. Find them at corporatearmor.com. Again, that's corporatearmor.com. Hello, everyone, and welcome to ChannelPro Weekly, episode 138. My name is Matt Whitlock, technology editor, online director, and your host of this fine program for you. And who do I mean by you? I mean the VARs, the IT integrators, the IT resellers, the IT consultants, the MSSPs, the BRS, CLT, PC, TVCs. Right, because if you are in a career with a lot of long acronyms, you're probably in the right spot. Joining me this week and every week is our executive editor here at ChannelPro and a longtime co-host of this program, Rich Freeman.
Greetings, everybody.
Rich, are you bunkered down in Seattle?
I am. You know, I'm broadcasting from the home office here in downtown Seattle. We are not, fortunately, under a shelter-in-place kind of restriction right now. But then again, not too many places open to go. So yeah, I'm just kind of hunkered down here and getting stuff done.
And there's another man here who also had apparently nowhere to go, but we are glad that he's here. A special guest host. Awesome we got him on. Been looking forward to this for a long time. CEO of Semel Consulting, Mike Semel. Welcome, Mike.
Hi, Matt. Hi, Rich. Glad to be here. I am hunkered down in beautiful Las Vegas, which is pretty dark right now because all the casinos are closed and the restaurants are doing takeout. There's no shows, no distractions. When have you ever heard about that in Vegas?
Never. In fact, so before we started recording, Mike was telling me that he was going to go for a bike ride. But tell where you're going to go for a bike ride, because this is unheard of.
I'm going to ride my bike down the Vegas Strip, which I would never do because of all the traffic and the people not paying attention and the number of tourists. There's nobody there right now, and it's probably one of the most desolate and safest places to ride in the country.
That is just mind-boggling. So for those who are maybe watching this far in the future, we are recording this as we are in the midst of this whole COVID-19 coronavirus kind of. I don't want to use the word crisis because I don't really think it's a crisis. I think the reaction to this has been a little bit on the overblown side, but everyone's really concerned about it. And I mean, as Mike said, everything is pretty much closed down. Casinos are closed. I know here in my home state, all the bars and restaurants are basically closed for dine-in. It's carry-out only. The schools are shut down. Gyms are shut down. All you can do is sit inside, and if you're still in this situation, so if you're watching this recently and you're looking for something to do, well, I've got great news. There are 137 episodes of ChannelPro Weekly that you could go back and watch. Great interviews. Go back to the beginning, start from episode 1, and by the time you get to the end, hopefully the coronavirus scare will be over, and you'll be a lot smarter after listening to all those great interviews and all that great insight, right, Rich?
Yeah, absolutely. And you can't watch all those episodes, but you really ought to listen to them. And it'll be almost like a history lesson of the last few years in IT.
Yeah, that's a good point. So episodes 0 through 99 are in audio form only, which is probably where a lot of people are listening to this anyway. But go back and listen to that back catalog. Lots of great stuff. So Mike, tell us a little bit about you and your consulting business and kind of what you focus on, and tell us about you.
Okay, Matt, I started in the IT business back in the late 70s. And then we were in a family electronics business. We were selling some of the new computers, and I was talking to my dad who owned the business one day, and we said that company Apple looks kind of interesting. So we became an Apple dealer in 1979, and I started going to meetings with Steve Jobs. To Rich's dismay, I was in college to learn journalism and specifically magazine, and decided, no, I wanted to have a real job. And I wanted to get in the computer business because it was so exciting and it was new. And I still love journalism, by the way, but it was a big life change for me. I started as a retail computer business, became a VAR, then became an MSP. 8 years ago, sold out and became a consultant. And I focus in vertical markets that have to comply with regulation. So I'm pretty well known for HIPAA. I have written a book called How to Avoid HIPAA Headaches. I've trained hundreds, if not thousands, of MSPs when it comes to HIPAA. And that's what I'm known for. But we also work with clients that have to comply with other regulations, such as government contractors, Department of Defense contractors, and people like that. Now we're just consultants. I don't sell any IT products or services, but we work with MSPs and through MSPs with their clients. So I'm really up on everything that's going on. We have our own in-house office where we work from home in our company. So we're already where we need to be when it comes to the ability to do that. But we've been helping a lot of our clients in the last week understand what they need to do. One of the problems was that their senior people, like the lawyers that work in law firms and some of the medical people that work in healthcare organizations, had been working from home for a long time. But the big challenge was sending home those frontline people, the people that answer the phones and do the billing and a lot of the kind of back end services that you don't see. They were not prepared, and these aren't really IT savvy people. So it's been a big challenge to get people to work from home, work securely, have the IT infrastructure, but also get them to think about having security in their home to keep information away from now their family members and friends that may drop by where they don't have the security of an office.
Yeah, and we're definitely going to be talking a little bit about that. I know later on in the show, we have another interview coming up with Richard Stiennon, and I know that's going to be a big hot topic. We're going to talk about security and compliance, and as far as working remotely is concerned, because there's a huge push to get people still working, but working from home away from other people because of the whole social distancing thing. And, you know, we got to see, I'm never going to work next to Rich again. Rich, you got to stay away from me.
Frankly, I'm a viral risk at any time. So this is nothing new for me.
Nothing new.
6 feet away, people. Yeah, always.
Always. At least with anything with Rich, just double it. So if it's 6 feet, stay 12 feet away. If he goes in an elevator, let the doors close, take the next one. Real important. Speaking of social distancing, we do want to touch on our Washington, D.C. event in May. We have lots of people asking what's going on. Rich, why don't we give people an update on that?
Yeah. So, and we touched on this in the last episode, but for folks who maybe missed that episode, we do events, we do live events, we do online events here at ChannelPro all year long. The next event on our calendar, we have an online IoT Summit event coming up next week, events.channelpronetwork.com. Please check it out because that's actually going to be a really, really great show. Our colleague Mark Smith has all sorts of amazing stuff lined up for that. So IoT Summit next week, check that out. But after that, we have an in-person event scheduled in the Washington, D.C. area on May 6th. And obviously that may not be something that we can pull off in the current environment. As of right now, we are still planning to do that. But I want everybody to know, even if is no longer practical for us to do the show in person, the show will go on, as they say in showbiz. So we are already actively working on a sort of virtual equivalent to that show if we need to go in that direction. And it will feature, you'll get the same content, you'll hear from the same speakers, it'll be the same experience, you'll just be kind of doing it from home instead of doing it at the hotel. So key thing there is just if you're thinking, I might like to go to that ChannelPro event. I hear good things about ChannelPro events, but maybe this isn't the time to be doing that. Don't let that keep you from registering right now at events.channelpronetwork.com. Because if it really isn't safe for us or for you to be there, we're going to do the show anyway. We'll do it online, and you will still benefit from all the terrific content that we have been working so hard on preparing for.
Yeah, and also more to note, no final decisions have been made. We are still planning on doing that show in person, if at all possible. And of course, if you're subscribed to the show, please do subscribe. Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify. Subscribe and just listen week to week, and we'll update you as we go forward. Probably at the beginning of every show, and you'll always have the latest information. So. Thank you for doing a quick word on that. We've got a lot to talk about coming up here. So we mentioned we have an interview with Richard Stiennon coming up. We're going to talk about IT first responders in the age of COVID-19, techie geek taking a proactive approach. So a lot of coronavirus stuff, but hey, it's kind of what's in the news. But Kaseya is also in the news about no-wait cyber insurance. Something about passwords. I'm really looking forward to this discussion, Rich, about password expirations. We're letting those expire. I'm really, really curious about that. And M&A the right way part 1. This is a multi-part thing we're doing, but we'll touch on that as well. So we're going to have Mike with us the whole time. So excited. Mike, we're going to be going to you a lot to chime in on these. Rich, first story in the age of COVID-19. Paul Nebb is the IT first responder. Tell us about that.
So the article you were referring to there is actually the first in what we expect to be an ongoing series of articles. So obviously the current situation is difficult for everybody. It's particularly difficult for a lot of our readers right now. And it depends a little bit on where you are in the country and what kind of travel restrictions or other bans might be in place and so on. But I mean, in a lot of the country, obviously right now, people are working from home instead of the office. And, that's an enormous job for an MSP to deal with. And so we're very curious at ChannelPro how MSPs, how VARs, how our readers are, helping their clients cope with this situation, what kinds of challenges they're running into, and in particular, what kinds of solutions they're coming up with to those challenges. So we've created a series that we're calling From the Coronavirus Trenches, for lack of a better name, and it'll just be a series of profiles of readers, what they're going through and what they're learning in the process. The hope, of course, is that they'll be able to share information that will be beneficial to other folks dealing with similar kinds of issues. So in the case of Paul Nebb, he is an MSP. He's based in New Jersey. Since for the last week, basically, he and his 5-person staff have been just going around the clock. And it's difficult for me to know how this compares to the average person in our audience right now, but he's got about 100 clients. About 70% of them were, to at least some extent, set up to support remote work. The other 30% had nothing. And of that 70%, some of them were really just ready to go whenever they needed to. Others had maybe some kind of technology in place. So it's been a mad scramble for Paul, obviously, which is why he calls himself an IT first responder, to get these companies he supports up and running as quickly as possible. And, it's 100 clients, it's 5 people. It's difficult to meet the needs of all those companies at once. And so he talked a little bit about this kind of triage process he's been going through with the customers where, I can't do everything that you need me to do for you right now, but give me 2 things, 3 things, 4 things that'll kind of keep you going for the next 24, 48 hours, and then we'll come back and we'll do some more stuff later on. He shared some best practices advice that he has based on his experience, and this is the kind of thing that we hope to have a lot of in this series going forward. And so he said, there are concerns sometimes among channel pros about over communicating with clients, being a nuisance, pestering them. And his experience basically has been there is no such thing as over communicating with customers right now. They will be grateful for as much communication as you give them. And he really strongly advises people stay in touch with everyone as much and as often as you can. He and Mike Bloomfield, who we'll talk about briefly in a minute, part of the same series, also in that part of the world dealing with some of these issues. Both of them are, recording tutorials and leading webinars about how to use Microsoft Teams, how to use Zoom. There are a lot of people who don't know this stuff right now and need to learn it in a hurry. And that kind of communication in particular is something that customers really appreciate right now. He had another point. This is very top of mind for him, and something maybe we can get into later on the show when we do our interview segment. But he's really concerned that channel pros out there might start cutting corners a little bit when it comes to security. In that rush to get your customers back online as quickly as possible, which they are desperate to do, and they're telling you they're desperate to do, some people might take some steps that they wouldn't normally take, and that aren't wise, aren't secure measures. And he really believes it's important to avoid that right now, because the last thing you want to do is add insult to injury for a customer. And aside from everything else they're dealing with, now they're dealing with a breach or something like that because you did something expedient but not smart. And then you know what, he's despite the fact that he's been working pretty much around the clock for a week, he said he is taking some time for himself. He's been doing yoga recently, apparently. And I think that's important advice too for channel pros and everybody else. Is we need to take good care of each other right now, and we need to take good care of ourselves too. And making time for that, I think, is more important than ever.
Now, I'm not really a yoga person, but Mike, are you a yoga person? Are you doing yoga right now?
No, I'm not a yoga person, but I read the article about Paul, and first of all, I want to thank him for his service. He's an emergency medical technician in his community. When I had my MSP business in upstate New York, I was an EMT and also the rescue captain in the local fire department. And what Paul's figured out by now is that a lot of his training as a first responder in his community is really applicable to what's going on here. And I'll just tell anybody that think back if you were in the military or if you were ever in a fire department or anything like that, those are the skills that you need to apply now to make sure that, you stay focused, keep your head in the game, and deal with the important things. You use the word triage, and that's really what this is about, is making sure that you get the priorities taken care of first.
Yeah. Do you think this is going to be permanent? Like, I know we have all these IT first responders like Paul trying to help people get their businesses kind of back up and running from in a more remote sense. Do you think it's going to stay that way, or do you think eventually, once all the hoopla dies down, we're going to go kind of back to the way we used to do things?
Well, I don't think it's going to be 100% either of those. First of all, this immediate crisis will end. Pandemics run their courses. I'm certified in business continuity planning. I've done pandemic planning for businesses for about 20 years. And we were talking about the bird flu. We weren't talking about coronavirus specifically, and then Ebola. But these things do run their courses. But to answer your question, I think that with technology today, and once businesses do start running with folks from home, some of them are going to look at the rent bill and wonder, why are we paying, this high rent for an office when we can run our businesses, or at least parts of them, at home? For example, in doctors' offices, you have the patient-facing staff, the nurses, the doctors, the receptionists that have to be there. But how many of you have ever seen the billing office in your doctor's office? Why couldn't those folks be working from home or some lower priced location that doesn't take up quite as much space? So I think we're going to see that there's going to be a recession. There's going to be, some of these businesses will really be hurt financially, and they'll be looking not just working from home, but can they do the same business with fewer people? That's going to be a reality that I think a lot of people that may be laid off don't come back. So there are financial considerations to this also, but the world's changed. We thought maybe 9/11 was the defining event in our lifetime. And now we find out that terrorism was really localized compared to this, which is global. And I don't think any of us are ever going to be the same.
Yeah, very likely. So Rich, Paul Nebb, who we just talked about in that article, which is a fantastic article, by the way, and a great story. So for those who are listening on their phones or watching on YouTube, if you're listening on your phone, go to the show page for this particular episode 138, and we'll have links to all of these articles because we're just kind of scratching the surface on them. So you can go and you can read and get all the details. Same thing if you're watching on YouTube, open the show description area, and we'll put links to all of these articles there so you can kind of go and read and follow along as we go through. But Rich, Paul is not the only one that we have talked about in the sense of what they're doing to help customers with COVID-19. We have another story called about the Techie Geek. What's all this one's about, Rich?
So that is a profile. That's the second profile in this series. And like I said, it's a series, so check in regularly. In fact, I've got an appointment in about 90 minutes to talk to somebody who's based in your neck of the woods, Matt. And so there will be more of these stories coming. And in the case of Mike Bloomfield, who was actually a speaker at our live events last year, his company is called Techie Geek. Longtime friend of ChannelPro, well known in the managed services and channel communities out there. So we got some information from him, and each of these stories, as they join the series, there will be different particular insights that this or that partner shares. I'll mention one in the context of what Mike was talking about, and it's actually something that came up in my conversation with Paul as well, which is that customers of yours who are now working remotely and have a VoIP system, particularly if they have a desk phone at the office that is part of that VoIP setup, probably in fact don't realize that phone works anywhere you connect it to the internet. So this is something that Mike has been telling customers, Paul has been telling customers. You can go to the office, get that phone, bring it home, and connect it to the home Wi-Fi network. It's not like having your desk office or desk phone from the office at home. It is exactly having your desk phone from the office at home. It will work exactly the same way. And Paul, can't remember if I mentioned it in the article or not, but I remember in our conversation, he said he shared this information with one of his customers, and she was like, "Oh my God, if not for social distancing, I would hug you right now because I had no idea this was the fact." So first of all, congratulate yourself, congratulate your customers if you got them on VoIP and they've got phones like that, because now everybody's understanding why that's such a great thing. And make sure they understand what that technology can do in a scenario like this, because it's really, really handy right now.
Yeah, super funny. And it's a huge win for IP telephony that it allows for that kind of flexibility that you may not necessarily think about, but you're right. Yeah. There's another side of that too, that this is like way off topic, but I wonder if we're going to start looking at home broadband capabilities as well, because, anybody who takes their office stuff from work, work might have a nice network, but when you're going home, you might have a Wi-Fi router provided by your, DSL provider, depending where you're in the country, that's 802.11b. I don't know, Mike. What do you think that there's going to be a big interest in immediately trying to upgrade like home networks as well to be more business friendly?
Well, Matt, it's really funny you ask that question, because the reason I'm at my place in Vegas is that my home in upstate New York, where my wife is in a rural community, and we are 4 miles from broadband. So we still do have that DSL connection, and I made the hard decision last week that in order to keep the business going and to keep providing services to our clients, that I needed to be at my place in Las Vegas where I've got 150 meg broadband. So it was a decision not just for my business, but actually for my life as to where I'm going to ride this out. So we're going to see more and more of that. There's some differences between home broadband and business broadband. Typically, when you buy a business account, you're paying a ton of money, and it looks like you're getting the same amount of speed at the business that you get at home for a fraction of that cost. But the difference is at the business, it's dedicated. And for people working from home, I'm sure you know that after the kids get home from school and at 7 o'clock at night, when everybody's watching Netflix, you don't get the performance on those networks. And I think those networks are going to be stressed right now with so many people working from home and doing Zoom meetings like this one and teleconferencing and remote access. I think what we're going to see is more focus on building out that capability and getting it to the rural communities. It's kind of ironic. I worked in a school district. I was a chief information officer in a very rural school district in northern Nevada. I like to tell people how rural it is by saying that the local Walmart was 180 miles away. And
that's rural.
It is. We had broadband in the schools, but there were kids that lived 40 miles out on like mountaintops that didn't have it. And now I think we're going to see a bigger push to get broadband to places because as the schools have been closing for COVID-19, there are kids that don't have internet capability. And we were worried about it in the rural area. There are also pockets in central cities, in major metropolitan areas because of the economic situation with the people that live there who don't want to pay or can't pay for internet, that we're going to need to build that out to support this. But yeah, I think that absolutely broadband and 5G when it gets here and things like that are going to be, very democratizing to allow people to work from wherever they are.
Yeah, I know a couple companies are working on these low Earth orbit satellite networks. I don't know if you've read anything about those. I know one's called Starlink, and I think Amazon, SpaceX, Tesla, Elon Musk is behind the Starlink one, and then there's Amazon. But those I think there's going to be a huge interest in those, and that could also be a big game changer in terms of remote work as well. Because now what you're talking about, these rural areas, mountaintops, where they're never going to dredge infrastructure up there, and these geosynchronous satellite internet services are, super slow and high latency and super unreliable. It seems like all that's kind of coming together at a time when all of this is a concern and might be transformative in terms of like rural areas being able to connect remotely,
I think we're going to really start to lose the concept of borders. And in the COVID crisis, they've now, the federal government has put out guidance or rulings that say that doctors don't have to be licensed in the states that they're practicing anymore. That was a huge barrier to telehealth, was that if you were living in a community and you wanted to talk to a specialist, you could only talk to a specialist in that state. But for the channel pros out there, I think that this is going to affect you as well, where because of managed services and the RMM tools and the remote capabilities that you've had, you're not going to have to be limited to a small geography anymore. You'll be able to provide your services, in some cases, virtually anywhere. Now, we're still going to have to go to our doctor and our barber or hairdresser or whatever, because those are people that we need to see in person. But I think more and more this social distancing is going to prove that a lot of the business that we've done traditionally in the past can now become more virtual, and that can expand your horizons financially if you're an MSP or an MSSP and you want to serve people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and what you're touching on there is important. We're talking about you're obviously a huge expert in compliance, and we're talking a little bit about compliance and regulations and all that kind of stuff. And Kaseya is in the news this week about something compliance related, about their no-wait cyber insurance. And Rich, I know when we started this program, I would have said that you were insane and completely crazy that we were going to be talking about insurance on this program because, we're like insurance brokers, but we seem to talk about it a lot. What's going on with Kaseya's cyber insurance?
Yeah. You're starved for distraction when an insurance story sounds like something that might be fun to discuss. But no, this is actually, and the truth of the matter is there hasn't been a ton of news coming out of the industry this week because I think a lot of companies are sort of adjusting to life right now. And I know there's going to be more stuff kind of coming along next week, but this is a news story that broke this week and an interesting one. It's right in Mike's wheelhouse too. It's from Kaseya. They have a product called Kaseya Compliance Manager. And basically what it does is keep track of, document all of the steps that a customer has taken to comply with various regulations. It started out focused on GDPR, I think was the first regulation it supported. It moved on to HIPAA. It's expanded since then. What they have done this week is add an integration with a third-party service called CySurance. Now, CySurance is not an insurance company. They're an insurance agent, but I mean, technically what they do is facilitate the process of getting cyber insurance from a major underwriter. And so in the case of this integration here with the Kaseya Compliance Manager, you can now, from inside the Compliance Manager interface, this is the industry terminology apparently, you can bind a policy to your end user customer from directly inside the interface and kind of bundle that in with a compliance as a service offering that you're using this Compliance Manager tool to operate. Now, to be clear, Compliance Manager allowed you to apply for cyber insurance from inside the tool before. What's different here, and this is why the headline calls this no-wait cyber insurance, is that the CySurance platform issues that policy immediately. So basically, you go into the tool, you fill out a relatively quick application process. You get real-time pricing on that policy based on the customer's vertical industry and the amount of revenue that they generate. And click, seconds later, you've actually got the policy. And this policy is underwritten by Chubb, which is a giant insurance company, one of the big names in cyber insurance. So, and interestingly enough, when I first heard about this, my thought was, well, here's a great way to add some value to your compliance as a service offering. But the folks at Kaseya kind of turned me around on that. And what they really encourage MSPs to do is think of this as the foundation for a cyber insurance as a service offering, which might be different from what you're doing now. So all of your customers, whoever you are, should have cyber insurance in place. And it's not all that hard to get it. And, everybody is doing it. Your competitors are all doing it. What you can do that would be a source of recurring revenue to you and potentially differentiating is say, I'm not just selling you cyber insurance, I'm also selling you this service that will help you document your compliance with the requirements of that policy, because the policies all require the policy holders to exercise due care, as they put it, basically to take prudent steps to secure their assets. And if the insurance company believes that you did not do that, you don't have a firewall, whatever it is, you didn't take the steps you need to take to secure your assets, they're not going to pay the claim. And you don't want to get into that kind of dispute and not have any evidence. What Compliance Manager will do is give you a very thorough, documented, continually maintained report that you can show the insurance company to prove that you exercise due care. And so that becomes a really interesting add-on, if you will, or component of a cyber insurance as a service kind of offering that you can take to all your customers. And it's great protection for them. It makes sure that if they need that cyber insurance, they're going to get paid, and it's another recurring revenue source for you.
And in this application, Rich, when you're looking at the different insurance, does this guy pop up on screen to say, do you need a little insurance?
And for the benefit of folks who are listening, who is that guy?
It was Ned Ryerson from Groundhog Day. Needle Nose Ned, Ned the Head. Ding! That guy. Yeah, so I think that his face should pop up, and that's what says, do you need cyber insurance? Mike, what do you think on the whole cyber insurance thing?
Well, Matt, I don't know if you know this, that Rapid Fire Tools is a Kaseya company, and they're our client. We help them develop their HIPAA module for Network Detective and the HIPAA section of Compliance Manager. And the whole cyber insurance module came out of a discussion I had with them when they were telling me about some of their future plans, and they were all vertical oriented in different industries. And they said, what do you think we should do? And I said, I wouldn't do any of them. They said, what do you mean? That's our business. I said, no, I wouldn't do any of them first. I said, I'd look at cyber insurance for a couple reasons. One is it's not vertical. It's horizontal. Every business needs cyber insurance, and there are different kinds of cyber insurance. There's cyber liability, which means that if you have a data breach, for example, you're a healthcare organization and you have a data breach, cyber liability insurance will protect you and cover the cost of the breach and settle lawsuits and pay fines and things like that. There's also cyber theft insurance, which is where you get the scam email that says, we need you to transfer funds or something. And if you fall for that, you have to call your insurance company. That's where money's been embezzled out of your company through a hack. And you can insure against these things. There's a story out of California where Cottage Health, which owns hospitals, had patients notify them that they had Googled themselves. The patients had Googled themselves and got their medical records back. And they sued the hospital. They sued Cottage Health. Cottage Health had bought a $10 million insurance policy from Columbia Casualty. So they called their insurance company and said, hey, we're getting sued. We need your help. And the insurance company hired the lawyers and the forensic experts and everyone, and they settled the lawsuit for $4 million. But then Columbia Casualty said to Cottage Health, we're still investigating it. We got the lawsuit out of the way, but we're not done. And then Columbia Casualty sued Cottage Health to get the $4 million back. And they had pulled out their application for insurance and said, hey, you answered these questions and said you did all these things to secure your data, but you didn't do them. So we want our $4 million back. And then the federal government fined Cottage Health $3 million. And then the state of California fined Cottage Health $2 million. It was a $9.1 million incident that they had to pay for out of pocket because their insurance didn't cover them because they didn't do all those things. So what Compliance Manager does, and I can't really speak to buying insurance, that part of it, that's a different area. That's not my area of expertise. But what Compliance Manager does is that we took the applications from the top underwriters. So there are 1 million insurance agents out there, but there aren't that many underwriters. We took the insurance applications and took all the questions. And now if you're a ChannelPro and you are working with a client and you say, have you bought cyber liability insurance? And they said yes. Ask them what company is underwriting it, and they'll give you the name of that company. You can then run your network scans and provide them with a report that shows in the same order that that application was written, all the questions were written. Here's the report that shows that you're compliant with question number 1, question number 2, question number 3. And that's the, if you'll pardon the pun, insurance that the insurance will pay off when it's needed.
Exactly, and that's the added value on top. So your customer needs the policy, but what you can also do for them is make sure the policy is actually going to be there for them, useful for them when they need it by providing that service. And it's kind of a compelling value proposition to bring to your customer.
Well, it's more compelling than, say, compliance just in general, because if we're talking to a healthcare organization and we say, hey, you need to be compliant with HIPAA because it's a law, they're thinking, yeah, but what are the odds that, the federal government's ever going to catch me? But when you say to them, you just bought this expensive insurance policy to protect you against cyber liability or cyber theft, and don't you want to make sure that that's going to pay off if you need it? It's kind of more retail. It's more, specific to the individual, and a business owner is going to think, I just bought this policy and there's no point in paying the premiums if it isn't going to pay off. Let's make sure it will. And when I say they're expensive policies, they're not expensive compared to what the risks are when you're getting $1 million or $2 million. And my insurance person likes to say $1 million used to sound like a lot of money, but it isn't anymore. When you have a claim, we have a small manufacturing company that's a defense contractor that got hit by ransomware, and they got almost $200,000 in their insurance settlement after a ransomware attack. So this is happening a lot. You keep hearing about governments and school districts and ransomware. You don't hear about the private sector because they don't have to talk about it in a public forum like these public organizations do. there's a lot of activity out there, and businesses need to have insurance.
Noted for all listening and watching, your customers need cyber liability insurance. So go do that now, and then make sure that they're compliant. That is a great wrapper to make to add on your services as well. Go find them. Very, very important. So we're going to move on. We've got a couple other stories we want to talk about. One is, Brett, I've been dying to talk about this the whole time. I've been waiting to get this. So this is called letting password expirations expire. And Rich, introduce this, and then we're going to have a very interesting discussion about this.
Okay. So, actually, interestingly enough, this story originated when I first kind of put this out on our, editorial grid or calendar or whatever. I was really kind of thinking about, letting passwords expire, because there are companies like Microsoft that are saying everybody hates passwords, and, there are better technologies out there. What the story wound up drilling into, which I think is a very interesting, relevant issue as well, is this whole idea of password expirations or password rotations. The idea that every 90 days, typically, you should be changing your password. And, I certainly have been coming increasingly across security experts who are saying that's either unnecessary or either even potentially counterproductive in certain ways. If your environment or a customer's environment has been breached, you need to change all the passwords. You don't necessarily need to enforce a password rotation if that hasn't been the case, at least and there are all sorts of different perspectives, different opinions on this, so there's no kind of consensus in or outside the security industry right now. But there's a point of view that says, hey, if you've got multi-factor authentication in place, for example, you don't need to be rotating the passwords every 90 days. There are MSPs now who are acting accordingly, basically with their customers, and they're letting customers keep the password and the NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, doesn't really recommend periodic password changes anymore. So this is increasingly advice that people are getting, and increasingly acceptable to ChannelPros and their end user customers. You can back off a little bit on password rotations. Your end users, the users out there, will appreciate it and thank you, and they certainly won't be less safe. A lot of people believe, and they might even be a little bit more safe.
Yeah, so I love the way this article starts off. And for folks listening, go and read this article. It says, according to the ancient scrolls of computer history, the first complaint about passwords came 1 minute after the first password was issued, which is so true. Like even in this day, in 2020, passwords are such a problem for people, and I don't know why. And I've also, Mike, I'm going to see where you fall on this. I have also never been a big, you have to change your password every 90 days thing. It's like, I don't rekey the locks on my house every 90 days arbitrarily, right? Now, if there was a break-in or if a copy got out there, I would change them. But I've always been if there's no reason to do it, then why are you doing it? Where do you fall on that spectrum first?
I can't disagree more with the idea that you shouldn't change a password until there's a breach. I mean, that's nuts. And here's why. First of all, why would you wait for a breach to change your password when the Verizon data breach study from, I think, 2017 said that 81% of breaches leveraged compromised passwords. So you're going to wait until you have the breach, and then realize we should have changed our passwords. No. Passwords are what gets to data. And Matt, I see things in the picture that you've got some valuable things in your house, but you don't have gold. And anybody that knows me knows that I say that data is worth more than gold. And when you look at medical records, for example, being worth $10 to $50 each on the black market, and you go and you do dark web scans, and you find that all these passwords have been compromised, your own passwords have been compromised, then why is it that you would wait until there's a breach? It doesn't make sense. And it's different than your house, because in your house, I can get to whatever you have in your house. If you were a bank, it would be a different story, but you're not. When it comes to passwords, the NIST guidance did change, but the NIST guidance said you should use a long phrase, and it should be something that you remember, and it should be different types of characters and things. Right now, Microsoft and the other software vendors don't have tools that will analyze those to tell you if they're strong, weak, if they meet that requirement, and you don't have a way to turn that on and force it. My answer to our clients, because we have clients that have hundreds of millions of dollars literally in data. If you measure it compared to the cost of a data breach report, when you look at how it would affect their business if they lost their data. I mean, we have clients that if they lose their data, these are proprietary designs and business contracts and bids and pricing models and things like that, they'd be out of business. So if you value your business, you better change your passwords. Now, multi-factor authentication is a great tool to reduce the frequency of that, because now we all do this when we go onto our bank. If someone stole our login and password to our bank account, unless they have our cell phones, they aren't going to be able to get that code to get in, because it requires that additional level of authentication. But I think it's crazy, absolutely crazy, for anybody to tell someone only change your passwords if you've been breached, when we know that so many breaches are based on compromised passwords.
Well, you're touching on a lot of different things there, and I concur. One of the big mistakes that people make is that they use the same password everywhere, right? So if one is breached, if you have a set of credentials that's breached and it gets posted, it could be for your account at Wendy's, right? But if you use the same username and password or email address and password and your bank, like, they're not necessarily trying to hack your Wendy's account, right? They're looking at these different credentials, and they're using them on all different kinds of websites to see what they can get at. So I think you're absolutely right, and it's important to note that there's a lot of different ways you can protect yourself. You are falling off the NIST guidelines, though, that they say you shouldn't change your passwords at arbitrary intervals, but you agree that you should, even in a world of two-factor authentication.
Well, if we had a world of two-factor authentication, I wouldn't worry about it, but we don't. So we're telling our clients, if you don't want to change passwords, then put in multi-factor authentication. But to use the example of your house, Matt, right now, you've got tools that can look at intrusion prevention. So if you're in a business and you've got an intrusion prevention system running, you can go pull a report off your firewall to see how many attempts have been made to get into the network. We did this once with a client who thought it was like a year and it had been an hour's worth of data, just because people don't realize how many times there are attempts. If you had a Ring doorbell on your house and you found that every 10 seconds people were coming up trying to open your door, you're going to keep your password, or you're going to keep your door locked, right? But then if you did a dark web scan and you found out that there were a bunch of people out there that had copies of the key to your house, then you're going to change the locks, to use your example of my home. Well, we know these things because we do them in the course of our technology businesses. We know that passwords account for a huge number of breaches. We know how many attempts are being made to get into networks. We know that there are credentials for sale on the dark web. I just have the disagreement when somebody says, well, let's wait until after the breach to lock the barn door. Horses running down the road, now we're going to go lock the barn door. No, you need to prevent the breach, because breaches are horrible. Breaches can put you out of business. If you're a ChannelPro, if you're a managed service provider, you're being targeted right now because the hackers know that if they hack you, they just got domain admin credentials to all of your clients and all the logins and password to your client sites. Do you really want to not change passwords and hope that nobody gets that, or you'll change them after the breach? I think the message is prevent the breach.
And I guess the question is just where do password rotations fit? So, I mean, there are all sorts of different facets of what I would call password hygiene. And so to your point, you're absolutely right. I mean, you could have people right now who are using stolen passwords and don't know it. And you mentioned dark web scanning. So, I mean, that really feels like a pretty smart bit of password hygiene, right? Is to be watching to see if a password that somebody is using pops up on the dark web, because that obviously is a password you need to get rid of in a hurry. But even if you're doing that, it sounds like from your perspective, and maybe even if you're doing multi-factor authentication, you still kind of feel like occasionally rotating the password is going to make you safer.
Well, multi-factor authentication really reduces the need. But to your point or Matt's point that people use the same passwords over and over, and I think we're all guilty. I use variations of the same type of password on different things, from consumer applications all the way through our most sensitive business applications. And I use a password manager because I can't remember them all, and some of them have different requirements. And outside of our own businesses, there are cloud services and other things that force password rotations. How many times have you tried to log into something and gotten the message your password expired, you need to change it? So I'm concerned that people may be thinking that for their own businesses that they don't need to do it as much because of this guidance and some of these opinions out there. But I'll go back. If you've got sensitive data that you need to protect, that's either intellectual property or proprietary designs or even bids and merger and acquisition information that you may have, then it's critical. Make sure that that stuff is protected. And the best way to do that is multi-factor authentication, certainly, but it's not everywhere. We're seeing a lot of businesses that haven't implemented it. We did implement it, and I thought it was going to be really annoying. I go back to the days of the RSA fobs, and if you remember those, every time you did something, you had to pull that key ring out of your pocket and go type a code in. And now the systems are set up that when I go into our Office 365 email on my computer, the first time I did it, I had to authenticate with a code off the Microsoft Authenticator. From then on, I didn't, because it remembered that device. But if I go on through a web interface, it asks me for the code every time. So I'm typing along one day and on something on my computer, and I get a pop-up that says, there's a request to go into your Microsoft Online account. Do you allow it? And all of a sudden it hit me. I'm being hacked. And I said, don't allow, and I didn't get hacked that day. That was the message to me that I'm still a target. And if somebody had gotten the password, they might have been able to get in. So multi-factor is really the answer.
Yeah, absolutely.
So one thing that you also mentioned that I think is super important is the use of a password manager. And this is one of these things that we're in 2020. Everybody has a trillion passwords. Nobody can remember them, but I encounter people all the time that still don't have any system for secure password management and retention. And I've been using a password manager for the last 15 years. I've never had a problem remembering passwords because I only have to remember one password, right? And which is the secure password to my password database. And then once that's open, like I most of my passwords are probably 30 characters long and complete gibberish because it does the passwords and I just copy them in and away you go. Would you say it's a super important thing that people use a password manager like that?
Yeah, because what you described is known as single sign-on. And we have clients that are in regulated industries and they're moving to the cloud, and it's really difficult right now to track this. And in the old days of IT, when we all started out, anything that touched a computer had to go through an IT department. But now you've got marketing departments and other areas within businesses that are setting up their own accounts, and even HR and payroll is in the cloud. So you've got really sensitive information. You've got a lot of risk of financial embezzlement and theft and things like that. And it's really hard to track. We've had people that work in financial departments And when we've looked at their list, no, we don't look at their passwords per se, but we look at the termination checklist, that if that person had to get let go from the business or quit, where would people go to get them out of systems? And I've said, I don't see the bank on here. Aren't you the one that, goes through the credit card bill and pays it, and goes on to the banking account? Oh yeah, well, we forgot to write that down. One of the reasons for these password managers is that if somebody does leave, or if you get hacked and you decide I better go change my password at all these other cloud services and websites, it's now a checklist that you can use to go through and make sure that you don't leave any, open holes in your own personal security or business security.
Yeah.
But yeah, single sign-on, password management, whatever, they're great tools.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we are going to move on from passwords, but I'm sure this is a topic that if you're working with businesses, it's important and you got to think about it and come up with great advice. Mike says, rotate those passwords at least occasionally and deploy multi-factor authentication as a way to do that. We got articles that also talk about similar things, so go check those out and help your customers make the right decisions to keep them safe and secure. Rich, we want to do M&A. We just want to do M&A the right way. What is the right way?
M&A the right way. Isn't that a great name? That is the name we have come up with here at ChannelPro for a series of articles we'll be doing in our monthly magazine about mergers and acquisitions, for you as a VAR and MSP. And so the cover story for our March issue is the first article in that series. And this one, which is available online now, we'll have a link for you in the show sheet for this episode here. This is all about getting your company ready to sell. Now, I'll just, as a for example, I know the cover story for our June issue is going to be about, looking at the same transaction from the other side. If you're going to be making an acquisition, what should you be looking for in a customer and so on. But here's a situation, the March story is about something that pretty much everybody out there listening or watching right now is going to deal with at some point. Everybody's got an exit strategy, which probably involves selling the business. And we've got some really great concrete advice for you about that from our own Colleen Fry here. And what she did, we did a session about this topic actually at our live shows a couple of years ago. And the key thing that we made sure people understood then is that you don't want to be thinking about this, a few months, a year even, before you actually sell the business or begin the process of selling the business. This is something that you need to be thinking about now, even if, retirement and the exit strategy is years down the road. And what Colleen did here is actually kind of organize. She said, what should you be doing? What should you be thinking about, say, 3 to 5 years in advance of a sale? What should you be doing maybe as well 3 years out, 1 year out? She's got it all sort of laid out for you. We won't get into, there are tons of really great specific pieces of advice in here from M&A consultants who work with MSPs. But just, for examples, you need to be looking at the valuation that you can fairly expect to get in the market for your business now. Even if you're 3, 5 years out, 7, 10 years out, you should know what your business is worth today, because if it's not as much as you think it should be worth, you've got plenty of time to do something about that, and that's something that you actually should be working on now. As you get closer and closer to that sale date, you need to be looking at your customer list and weeding out the least profitable customers, because these days the two things that buyers are most interested in are recurring revenue and profitability. And so any customer you've got on the roster right now who is hurting your overall profitability is somebody that you need to kind of transition away, out of your business and replace with somebody who's going to be more profitable for you. If you're not doing managed services, or it's a small part of your business now, you've got time to change that and build up the recurring revenue that's really going to make your business more valuable. So lots of advice like that in terms of issues you need to be considering and how far in advance you really need to be considering them.
Yeah, there's a lot in here to digest, lots of advice and tips. I don't think we should spend a whole lot of time on it. I'd like to invite people to go and read through this. Mike, I want to give you a chance to react, though, I'm sure you kind of looked through this. Was there anything in here that you were like, wow, that's a great point or a great piece of information that people should know about? You have anything in here you want to talk about?
Yeah, Matt. Mentioned in the article is what verticals or specializations you have in your business. And I think that this goes back to just basic marketing, but now think of yourself as marketing your company to someone that may purchase it as opposed to someone who may just buy your services. And you have some of the same challenges. How do you differentiate yourself and your business from others? And I was very successful by shifting my business way back in 2003 from IT services to compliance services. And there weren't a lot of tools and resources that I was able to find. I had to do it on my own. I had to learn these things and build it into my company. But that changed my company, and that made my company an acquisition target at the time. Way back I sold in 2006. But then over time, I've been in other companies and we've done the same things. And we performed all the same specific things that every managed service provider did. But because we focused on healthcare and education verticals, then we were more valuable in the marketplace to buyers than we would have been if we were just a general MSP going across the board. I can't mention her name, but I got a call recently from a managed service provider who said, "Did you hear the news?" And I said, "What?" She said, "My company got acquired. And the reason we got acquired was because we were focusing on the healthcare vertical, and that was what the bigger company that bought us wanted to get into." The other thing in this article says your company's going to be worth more if you're willing to stay on and continue working in it because of the relationships you built up over time. She said that she was asked to join the senior leadership team of the new company that acquired her because they wanted her expertise on the strategies of moving into the verticals. So my suggestion to you to add value to your business is to focus on a vertical, get really good, and make sure that you're marketing that specialization because that'll get noticed by people that want to invest or buy you.
And great advice for those whose goal is to get acquired. That is one of the fast track ways you can do that. So that it's great advice, good point, and awesome stuff. So we're running a little long, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to take a break. When we come back, we got an awesome interview with Richard Stiennon from IT Harvest. We're going to be talking about kind of a lot of the security concerns about enabling remote work in light of the whole coronavirus thing. So we're going to go and do that, and stick around. It's going to be great. All right, welcome back to part 2 of ChannelPro Weekly. We got a great interview lined up here for you. So, in light of this whole coronavirus thing, there has been a massive amount of interest and push to quickly get workforces working remotely. But as we all know, there's a lot of security-related issues that come around with remote work. So here to discuss that with us is Richard Stiennon. He's the Chief Research Analyst at IT Harvest. And he's also got a new book out, Security Yearbook 2020. Welcome, Richard.
Oh, thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Great to have you here. So for those who may not be familiar with you and with IT Harvest, tell us a little bit about you and what you do.
Yeah, so I'm a former Gartner analyst, and in 2005, after an attempt at working at a vendor, I realized I was pretty much just cut out for being an analyst. And so I started my own firm, IT Harvest, and I've been covering the entire IT security space since then.
Fantastic. So, and how long were you an analyst at Gartner?
Only 4 years, and it's kind of reminiscent of the period we're in now, right? It was just after the dot-com boom. It was the crash, and I got extremely lucky that I joined, a big company during that, the doldrums of tech. I kind of am wishing I were in that position today, but I'm going to struggle through it.
Good, and obviously a lot about security. In fact, you wrote a book about it. Tell us about the book that you just had out.
Yeah, so this is my 5th book, Security Yearbook 2020. And the whole concept for it came about because I spent all of 2018 writing and publishing a book on secure cloud transformation, which will be a good topic for us to talk about since it involves remote access. But I was at RSA last year launching it, and I said, wow, this is great. I love launching a book at RSA, so I need a book for next year, 2020. And I was also talking to a lot of new entrants into the industry. So people that said they had been working in the industry for 2 weeks and they were sent to RSA to get up to speed on everything that's going on. I realized that's a difficult task at such a busy conference. And I also met a lot of startup founders. When I told them, they'd say, oh, we do this for secure servers. I says, oh, like Santa Security? And they go, what? Like they didn't know any of the history of the industry that they were entering. So it all gelled into, you know what? I'm going to write what I know, which is the history of the IT security industry. And this is also a great opportunity to publish the directory of all the vendors that I've been putting in a database for the last 15 years. So I put those two together, and this is going to be kind of the foundation of what I'm working on every year from now on.
Fantastic. So obviously the whole Corona COVID-19 virus is at the top of everybody's mind, and it's forcing a lot of companies to rethink, everything, right? From what people they actually need to come into an office, how people are being arranged. And there's a huge, huge push, and people are saying this is going to be one of the big catalysts that's going to really drive a lot of businesses to have a lot more employees work remotely. And there's obviously a lot of caveats to that. So why don't we go ahead and just kind of get a discussion going about that, and what are the issues and security things that people need to think about?
Yeah, it's funny. The first time I ever heard anybody say, this is the beginning of work from home and the end to commuting, and the dream back in the 90s was that we could all live out in the country, and once we had internet access and we wouldn't have to commute anymore, and that would save the planet. And that was during the kind of the shutdown of Atlanta during the Summer Olympics there. I think IBM and a couple others sent everybody home to work from home with dial-up modems back in the day. And obviously that didn't happen, right? Commuting is strong and travel is strong and has been since then. But this time around, we're going to be forced into it for what could be 8 weeks or more at this rate. And those of us who are used to working from home, judging by everybody I see in the video, we're all in that boat. It's not a disaster for us, but I was just talking to a friend at a major financial institution based in Detroit. He didn't give me permission to reveal their name, but they have 20,000 employees. And all of last week, they orchestrated a move to get everybody to work from home. They went to CDW and every supplier of computers and pulled semi-trucks into the parking lot, and people would drive up and be issued their monitors and computers and everything they needed to work from home and sent home. And they got all 20,000 employees to go home in less than a week. So very impressive. It reminds me of when Saudi Aramco was hit and they had to replace all 30,000 desktop hard drives and reimage machines in a period of only a couple of weeks. So the one thing I've been trying to cover and look at is, okay, we know that work from home technology is going to do well right now. This is the shot in the arm that it needed. If you watch the stock ticker for Zoom, obviously they're the only one going up when the rest of the market is going down. But I look at, it surprised me that companies like, the companies that engage in so-called SASE, secure access, edge kind of things, their stocks were tumbling as well. It's as if the investors didn't realize that a Zscaler or Shlomo Kramer's company or the smaller companies like Perimeter 81 were right in the middle of this, right? They enable companies to get secure access through their cloud edge, for lack of a better term. So basically they're reverse proxies. So they can replace the entire security stack of firewall and content URL filtering, and of course the VPN concentrators that are no longer needed in this model. And they should be doing, a lot of business right now. Mind you, I don't know if anybody's doing any business right now because everybody's so focused on scrambling to get a response to this.
So Richard, like you said, I mean, for those of us who are on this podcast right now, we're at least used to these kinds of remote work arrangements. Doesn't necessarily mean, by the way, that my setup here is secure, but we at least have some familiarity, exposure to this kind of an arrangement. If you were to guess, if we're talking about the average US SMB right now, the kind of end user that our readers are supporting, how prepared would you guess those companies are to do remote work securely?
I'd say 5%. And those are the ones that, like me, I'm a very small SMB, right? It's me and probably 4 or 5 contractors, right? And I made the shift 10 years ago. I had a zero Microsoft philosophy because I was so tired of having to clean up my system. So I got off of Microsoft, experimented with Linux on the desktop, and ended up with a Mac. And I moved all of my assets to the cloud in a relatively secure way. And then I monitor and use cloud firewalls for the websites, and feel relatively secure. A targeted attack using Mac malware I might succumb to. But a lot of companies are actually in that boat, right? So small law firms, CPAs, consultants, they're already cloud enabled, right? They don't have a print server sitting in their back office. They've certainly got away from having Microsoft Exchange, and they've moved to Office 365, which is a fantastic security measure, right? Microsoft is doing a lot to prevent these phishing attacks from getting into you. I would imagine that SMBs, 0% of them have gone all the way to using a Proofpoint or one of the other, email security companies. So that would be a good thing if somebody would offer something at $10 a month to SMBs. They would probably sign up for it. But that's the level of protection you need. Once you get rid of all the equipment in your office, be it a home office or small office, you never had a data center presence. The larger companies have those, and their cloud transformation is moving out of the data center. And SMB's transformation is moving out of having a print server or local file storage. And by moving to these cloud services, you're probably protected a little better against ransomware. You probably have an easy to deploy or implement disaster recovery solution, right? You can always connect if you lose internet access because your broadband provider goes down. You can always back up with your cell phone provider, which will become easier when we're all on 5G. And then your hosting provider is usually doing backup and recovery for you anyways. So we're definitely in a better shape than we would have been 10 years ago for this transition.
Now, MSPs I talk to, so I mean, there are obviously a lot of SMBs out there that have not kind of made that all in on the cloud kind of transition yet.
Yep.
And so, I've spoken to MSPs who are spending their time this week and last week setting up terminal servers, getting VPN connections established for the businesses that they support and so on. For companies that are, they're just trying to get their workers connected at this point, and they're using some of those kinds of technologies to help people, essentially remote into the office and connect to servers and so on and so forth. Are there particular risks or threats or priorities that an MSP or a VAR should be kind of focused on right now to make sure that arrangement is secure?
Yeah, the trouble with creating this overlay VPN network access for the corporate network, to call it for lack of a better word. So even small companies with 30 or 50 employees have a corporate network. And it is extremely dangerous to all of a sudden implement VPNs where, boom, you're jumping them behind the firewall, giving somebody remote access. The end users are always the targets of attacks. They're going to click on the wrong thing or download the wrong app, and they're going to become infected. And then they're going to have, the attackers will have the credentials from the VPN client to get into the corporate network. So you're basically opening the door to attacks. And that's something that the MSSPs should be monitoring closely. They should be putting in an additional layer. The MSSPs should be moving to some sort of cloud SASE models so that they're actually intercepting all the traffic and filtering it and cleaning it, protecting against these types of attacks before they allow access to corporate assets. So it's no longer should be access to the corporate network. It should be an access to the applications. So you kind of take networking and network security out of the loop. And, it's a long haul for a smaller company to get there, but it is the right direction to go. And you could actually leapfrog the big companies that are, taking years for this kind of transformation.
What we're talking about here gets to an issue that came up in a conversation with an MSP in New Jersey who we were actually talking about earlier on the show. And he's telling all of his peers right now, basically, not to cut corners on security. There's a strong temptation right now when you're just trying to get customers online to do some things that might be potentially dangerous, change some configuration settings that could be an issue for you later on. What are your thoughts, basically, on how a ChannelPro listening to the podcast right now should sort of strike the balance between getting a customer online fast, but keeping that connection safe?
I would think about the concept of air gaps, right? If you quickly give everybody access to something, you are going to be in your firewall changing port policies just to make it work because you're under a lot of pressure to get somebody online quickly. But if you've got a critical app that you want them to have remote access to, it could be your order entry system, could be customer support. Think about the trade-off of trying to get everybody to VPN in, possibly buying a $50,000 VPN concentrator versus moving that critical app to the cloud and providing the security around it that's required, and then granting access to people only through your identity store. So you've got a directory of some sort. You're probably using Active Directory. I know that's a year-long transition for a lot of organizations, but in an emergency, people are really good at moving their Active Directory quickly from on-site to Azure AD, which is going to be hosted for you. That's where all your credentials are. Everybody authenticates to that in the normal manner, but now they've got direct access to the application, which is sitting probably right next to it in an Azure cloud or AWS. So that would be the idea of an air gap, right? You're taking all the networking out of it and applying so-called zero trust to allow people to only authorized people to get access to these critical applications. The great thing about that is that you've removed that critical application from being visible to the attackers. So that's the stealth that you hear people talking about. If only an authenticated user actually knows about where the application is, basically that proxy in the middle is the only one that knows, then the attackers can't scan the internet and find it. Oh, hey, this server is taking credit cards. It's probably got some credit card information on it. They won't know that, so they won't even be able to find it.
That's real interesting. Mike, I want to get your take from a couple angles here. One from the compliance standpoint, because I imagine if you're going to start allowing more of your workforce to work remotely, that there's going to be some compliance things that you need to think about. And any other thoughts you have about kind of the advice you'd have around security or things that you'd advise people to think about?
Sure, Matt. Well, when we talk about compliance and security, they're different. Compliance basically is being able to prove that you're doing something in a secure way according to a regulation. But security is just protecting data, and we always tend to think about it as data, electronic, because we come to it from an MSP standpoint. However, what concerns me is that there's also information. And if you look at information and you look at the spoken word, the written word, and electronic data together, one of the things that we tell our clients to air gap is their physical space. So having all this IT security is absolutely necessary. There's no question about that. But also you need some physical security so that your screen isn't pointed in a direction where your family members or visitors could see it. And you shouldn't be having phone calls where other people can overhear things that they shouldn't. And we're not just talking about compliance, for example, when it comes to healthcare or really sensitive business information. The nature of this coronavirus is that it's likely people will be talking about other people and their medical conditions, even coworkers, not necessarily patients where the information would be protected, but this could be stigmatizing. You could be violating HR rules and things like that. Just having a conversation, what today would be a normal conversation about somebody in the company, for example, testing positive. So these are the things that you need to think about too. Also, don't forget, with all this cybersecurity, if you print something out, now you've got a physical security concern with the piece of paper. Is there sensitive information or regulated information on it? Our first advice is don't print it. You don't have to worry about it. But if you do print it, then you need to secure it and make sure that it's shredded, not just thrown in the garbage. So people working from home is disruptive. And I don't know about you, but it's been kind of hard to focus over the last few days with all the news and alerts popping up on my phone and things. And I've limited how much news I'm watching because frankly, it gets depressing. But people aren't really focused on cybersecurity. We've put out some guidance about things like if you're going to get up and walk away from your computer, even at home, lock it, because what may have started out as a minute away turned into 10 or 20 minutes, or maybe you're not going to go back for the rest of the day. And your home is your home. It doesn't have the same physical security attributes that you'd have in an office. And even your kids and your friends and your kids' friends and things like that hanging around, if you're not doing all the social distancing from your close family members and maybe some close friends, they shouldn't be in a position to get to corporate information. From a compliance standpoint, we're seeing some relaxation of the rules. The federal government had strictly restricted telehealth. So using electronic telehealth applications was only for people in specifically designated rural areas, or if they were confined to, say, a nursing home. And 2 days ago, the federal government put out guidance that says it's okay to use even things like FaceTime, as long as it's not public facing, like Facebook Live would be public facing, but it's okay to use the consumer applications. That's not a signal to the rest of the world that it's okay to use all those for business purposes, because they may not be secure. And right now, what they're really saying from a healthcare standpoint is that it's more important to treat people and keep social distancing for health reasons. But these security stacks, and Richard mentioned things that you can put into your system that go above and beyond the basic security in Office 365. And there are VPN solutions, but then there are true security solutions that really take out of the question of, is that computer that you're using, which over time won't be as maintained, even if it's a business system, it's not going to get the level of security and maintenance at home that it may have gotten at the office. We still have to maintain those securities, but a lot of this just gets down to people and doing things to make sure that their work environment is secure and that their conversations are confidential. They aren't printing out things because, the most sensitive data that you can protect on your screen now becomes a piece of paper, and they aren't going to just throw it in the garbage. We don't like to think of this, but hackers and other bad people will do their best to take advantage of this situation. So we sent a message out to our clients saying, we've told you this before when you're in the office, but it still goes at home. Don't transfer money. Don't go out and order gift cards. Don't do the payroll deposit redirection, and don't send sensitive information to somebody, quote unquote, in your company because you got an email from them without talking to them first. So I think part of this is just basic reminders where you're going to tell people to, slow down and think. You're not focused. You're at home. You're in a different environment. You may have your kids around. You may have your dog where you don't normally have your dog at the office. And you really need to spend some extra time focusing.
And I'll say that I have a cat that will sneak in here when I don't see him and don't realize he's coming in here. He blabbers to everybody about what he sees on my screen.
So he probably posts to Facebook too. He gets on your keyboard
all the time, constantly. I also have to imagine all this social distancing. I imagine if you didn't really like your spouse very much, it would be great to be like, hey, the government says we can't talk to each other right now. So, you go over there on your side of the house. Now, Mike, you touched on a lot of great points and a lot of interesting things to think about, particularly, and I think it's important, Richard, and you tell me what you think about this. It's important to reiterate the basics that even in a time of uncertainty and doubt, don't be stupid, right? Don't try the email that comes in with the Nigerian prince. Like, don't respond to that like you normally wouldn't. Don't redirect payroll, as you said. Don't do things you wouldn't normally do anyway, just because the whole world has kind of lost their marbles. Richard, what would you say to that?
Yeah, totally agree. And we're all focused on pulling together and getting through a drastic crisis, right? None of us have any experience like this any time in our life. And while you're focusing on all that, you are thinking about your physical security by distancing yourself from possible infection. That's why you're at home. And you forget that the bad guys, have to make a living too, and they're going to take advantage of turmoil and chaos to execute their attacks. So they're going to be looking for health records. They're going to be looking for credentials and executing on those. I haven't seen any let up on the attempts to log into my admin panel for my WordPress website. Same IP addresses from Russia and China, still trying to try various usernames to get in. So you just have to be vigilant about all those attacks at the same time.
So, Richard, while we've got you, I do want to talk about the book some, and I'll tell a quick story first. So for folks in the audience here, Richard has been one of my go-to resources on security since the very earliest days of ChannelPro. I mean, well over a decade now. I don't know how many times he and I have spoken. We've never actually met in person, or at least spoken in person. Now, you mentioned, Richard, the book debuted at RSA this year. I was at RSA this year, and I'm hanging around the press center. I keep walking by a guy who looks really familiar to me, and I can't figure out, why does this guy look familiar to me? It wasn't until I had left San Francisco that I realized it was you. We were like right there. I finally had an opportunity to say hello to you in person, and just it did not happen. But we were both at RSA, hundreds and hundreds of exhibitors there, and you and I were both on the media and analyst registration list that went out to all those companies, and so we were being bombarded with inquiries from those companies looking to meet and so on. So I mean, there are a ton of companies in security right now. And in your book, if I'm not mistaken, you actually, in that directory you referred to before, you found 1,000 new security companies in the last 4 years. So I mean, talk a little bit about that, about just the growth and the sheer number of vendors and what's going on there.
Yeah, and I always question whether I'm just doing a better job of discovering the companies. So my next phase is I'm going to get the founding date for each of the 2,336 companies in my database. And then I'll be able to report, every year, these are the new companies this year, not just I happened to find a conference site in India that had 100 companies sponsoring it. That could have been around for the last 10 years. So it's a race to catch up with the amount of data. But it truly, the one space that I'm writing a market research report for is threat intelligence. So I published a report in 2016, and I think I had 21 vendors. So I went back and I grabbed all of those vendors that say they do threat intelligence from my database, and they're now 71. So that's real growth. The individual companies aren't growing as fast. Back then, they were growing at 88% year over year. Now they're growing at 33%, which is to be expected as a market matures a little bit. But that's still phenomenal growth for a segment that's just getting ready to cross over $1 billion in revenue a year.
Why do you think that particular, if I'm not mistaken, that was the fastest growing segment that you looked at in the book? And what do you think is behind that?
Yeah, I think we've always had various SIMs and what's now being called security analytics solutions that larger organizations and MSSPs use to grab all the alerts and hopefully do something with them. At the very least, correlate them so you can tell when something really serious is going on. But threat intelligence enriches that data and tells you. So if you've got just a indicator of compromise from a particular Russian hacking group or Ukraine or from the GRU maybe, and you match it with something that's going on your network that looked rather benign, somebody's poking around, but when you know it's the Russian, military intelligence poking around, now you got something to worry about and you better take action. So I think people are maturing in their ability to do so-called threat hunting, security analytics, SOC operations, and needing those feeds of real-time threat intelligence.
So, there's a lot of private equity money flowing into the security landscape right now. There are IPOs happening. I'm curious if, from your perspective, if those dollars are flowing in the right directions, basically. And, we were just talking about threat intelligence. Should that be the fastest growing segment? And, should the companies that are drawing the investment attention be the ones that are getting that attention, or are there maybe some misplaced priorities right now?
Yeah, great question. Certainly private equity has invested hundreds of millions in acquiring these companies. I'm always leery of a private equity move because they are really focused on cash flow and how they can acquire a company, cut out the slack, and somehow magically wave a wand and increase the cash flow, and that will fund the debt they took on to do the acquisition. It's completely different from the way Symantec used to do acquisitions, right? They looked for technology first because they had a channel, their own channel and their own customers that they could sell through for their products. Private equity doesn't have any of that, and they don't have any experience. So while I applaud the tremendous valuations that Recorded Future, for instance, got, because that fuels, everybody else in the industry is very happy about it. I do question the fact that threat intelligence, for instance, is, I would say it's a success compared to this concept of hiding, essentially breadcrumbs in your network, deception vendors. They are not doing so well. There's a couple dozen of them. They've all got really cool technology. And when a deception vendor has deployed a bunch of VMs in your network, some of them even deploy things inside your real documents. So if they get out, they beacon home and you know that you've suffered a breach. That is really good intelligence, right? If one of your honeypots is experiencing an attack, the attackers found your network and are in it, looking around. Luckily, they're sequestered in this honeypot. So I'm looking for that industry to, catch on. It must just be early days for them. First time I ever saw a honeypot vendor was in 2002. And at the time I said, wow, do not invest in this because your IT security department is just going to spend all their time watching the honeypot because it's fun. And that was an earlier day, right, when we didn't have the types of technologies we have to keep everybody busy fighting these attackers. So deception is way cool. Also this, back to our earlier conversation about zero trust and moving to the cloud, that is an area that is booming, obviously. The IPOs in that space, I think, are well worth watching. Obviously, Zscaler's 2 years since their IPO. I expect a couple of the other vendors, if the markets heal sometime in the next 6 months, to come rushing back into the public markets as well.
Well, fantastic stuff. Very interesting. We could probably go on this all day long, but unfortunately we're out of time. But we would love to have you back at some point. There's, I'm sure, a whole bunch of different security-related topics that we could touch on. But this one seemed very very timely, given everything that's happening right now, and what a great amount of insight that you have there. So what we are going to do now is we are going to cut to a break. When we come back, we're going to wrap up the show with some of our end of the show regular features. Mike Semel will continue to join us through the rest of the show here, and we will be. Richard, I'm sorry, but before people go, do you have a website people can learn more about you and where they can find your book?
Yeah, it-harvest.com is the company website, and the book's got its own website, security-yearbook.com.
Perfect. And we'll make sure that we add those links to the show notes page and to the description there on YouTube, so you have easy access to those two places. So please stick around. We will be right back. And we are back with part 3 of ChannelPro Weekly. Normally each week we do a museum pick and a tech pick. I think with all the great conversations we've had, we're running a little on the long side. We're going to skip those this week. We'll have those for you next week. But Rich, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about what has been and what's coming up down the pike?
Well, if you want to know what has been in this fine industry of ours, what you want to do every Friday is visit ChannelProNetwork.com. We have a post there called In Case You Missed It. It is by our own James Gaskin, the same guy who wrote that password story we were talking about before, and that great opening line about the ancient scrolls. That was classic James Gaskin. He does In Case You Missed It for us every Friday. This week, I did a story that is on our homepage right now, earlier this week, about some of the free software offers that vendors are putting out there right now. And yet, there are cynics who will say they're taking advantage of the current situation, maybe to market their products. But there are a lot of companies offering those products free for 90 days, 120 days, typically products that are useful in a remote work setting. And I actually think it's really great that people who need this stuff have access to it right now at a time when cash can be short. Well, it turns out there are way more companies doing that kind of thing than I was able to get to in my story. So James will have a roundup of those for you in the Friday roundup. There was, like I said, not a huge news week, but there was partner program news from both Samsung and the folks at Fortinet that James will be talking about a little bit. And then he'll also be writing up a story about an emergency kit. We're all sort of stocking up here, and we got to make sure we have the stuff that we need. James will be talking about a restaurant in the Los Angeles area out there that is offering an emergency kit with all the fixings you need to make tacos, plus 3 rolls of toilet paper. What a deal.
Which is often a necessary component when you have certain kinds of tacos.
It's all part of the package, isn't it? Yeah. No, it's thinking ahead. So read all about it on In Case You Missed It, ChannelProNetwork.com. Looking ahead to next week, there were all sorts of conferences on the calendar for this time of year that have been either canceled or postponed. But obviously the news that was going to be announced at those shows is still happening. So I can't really get into specifics. I'll just point out that HP originally was going to be doing its annual reInvent conference next week. I think it's safe to say that they're going to have some announcements coming up. D&H, they've got a show coming up a week from today. Don't know what, if any, sort of news items that they might have coming, but I'm looking forward to talking to some of their executives, learning about what's new at D&H. So definitely stuff coming up next week to tune in about on ChannelProNetwork.com.
Awesome stuff. Yeah. Mike, thank you so much for joining us as guest host this week. A lot of fun having you on. A lot of great insights. Now, you also have a book. Is that correct?
I do, Matt. How to Avoid HIPAA Headaches. And I'd love to give a free copy to anybody that wants one. What I did in the book is not write about, here's what HIPAA is and here's where it started and all the usual stuff. I took incidents and financial penalties and data breaches and just deconstructed them down to the lessons learned so you can prevent that for yourself. And MSPs have used this book to help them in their own businesses, and in some cases have given copies to their clients to get them to think about cybersecurity and compliance. So anybody that wants a free book, just text ChannelPro, ChannelPro, to 844-335-3635, and then fill out the order form so we know where to send it.
Well, that's very, very nice of you to do, and I highly encourage all of you to go and do just that. So thank you, Mike. And for those who want to learn a little bit more about your consulting business and about you, are you on the You on the socials? You on the internet? Where can they go?
I'm everywhere, and on the internet, it's just semelconsulting.com, SEMEL consulting.com. And as always, everyone, remember that data is worth more than gold.
And apparently toilet paper now, too. So, all right. Well, thank you so much for that. We would definitely love to have you back some way down the road. ChannelProNetwork.com is the website. Make sure that you tune your web browser to there each and every morning, all day, every day. We've got articles, white papers, downloads, podcasts, news stories, all kinds of great resources for you that is hitting that website each and every single day. If you would like to subscribe to Channel Pro Weekly, which I highly encourage you do, that way you're on top of the latest that we've got going on, and you don't have to worry about when we post new episodes, so they just show up on your device. It's great. We are on Google Podcasts, we're on Apple Podcasts, we're on Stitcher, we're on Spotify. Pretty much anywhere podcasts are aggregated, you can go and subscribe, so go and do that. You can. If you'd like to watch, we're on YouTube. Hit the red subscribe button and the little bell for notifications, and then that way you'll get notified when we have new episodes for you on YouTube if you'd like to watch along. We are Channel Pro Network on Facebook. We are at Channel Pro SMB on Twitter. If you want to follow me, I'm at Matt Whitlock on Twitter. Rich, you are?
At Rich Free.
So make sure you follow us there as well. We're also Channel Pro Network on LinkedIn. Like, you know what? We're everywhere. Just search Channel Pro Network and you'll probably find us. So to each and everyone who's listening out there today, stay safe in light of this whole Corona thing. Practice your social distancing. Keep 6 feet away. Don't necessarily stock up on 8 million rolls of toilet paper, but you know what? Get what you need and be safe out there. That's what we all ask for. So with that said, I'd like to also thank Corporate Armor Connect and Fix for sponsoring today's episode. We really appreciate their support, and we're gonna end it there. So everyone, thank you so much. Have a great week.